Hello, welcome. So this is actually going to be my first ever nighttime video. Just found myself with a little slot which I could use just to give an update and probably a final video on the Second World War by one small step. I said on the previous video that I really wanted to get into the naval part of the game, which I hadn't really experienced previously, which meant playing the Pacific Theatre. And I've done enough of that to get a feel for it now and to shake down the rules as I see them. And you know, I think it works, albeit with a fair amount of home brewing. Now that isn't for everybody. It's not everyone's cup of tea. I kind of quite like knocking a few ideas around and trying them out, but I understand that it's not for everybody. So essentially I have got a few pages of not just house rules but things that I've clarified in my own mind, which didn't really understand them fully, and I just like to get things down on paper, so I've got it as a reference and to add to and to adapt as I'm going forward. One of the biggest headaches for me was understanding the raid display, so I've just got a single sheet, lots of examples. You know, if you've got submarines on the megahexes in convoy routes, you've got your raiders as well on the raid display, you've got escorts on the raid display, but you can also have task forces actually in the megahexes. And you know, how does all that play out, and what are the costs and the implications of when subs can decide to not go for the convoy but to turn their attention on the escort or the carrier. So I wanted to get all that aligned in my head, which I've managed to do, and then I've just got a table, single sheet, which just has the interaction between, you know, ground to air, ground to naval, ground to sub. When do they ever have any bearing? How naval units engage other naval units or submarines, and how air units attack ground units. So you've got essentially a 4x4 matrix with how the various combat units interact with each other. Just as I've got my aircraft. There's a task force approaching. What can I do? What are my options? And what can the task force do in response? All that sort of stuff. So I think I'm fairly happy with that now. And you know, if I was to play with someone else, I think you could have a good game with it. I think it's enjoyable. The combat's interesting. The grand sweep of stuff that's going on. I'll show you the map in a minute. There's not many games that cover the whole global conflict at a scale or at a detail above sort of Axis and Allies. There's some that do it much more deeply, but they're a bigger thing to take on. Albeit you do have to have a bit of strength to sort of make your way through the rules a little bit. May have put some off, but I think if you persevere, and you're going to have to come up with some house rules. I don't think you can play the game straight out of the rule book. Almost defy anybody to do that and just play it without having any of those moments where you just go, I really don't know what you're supposed to do here. How does that work? Maybe it's me, but I've heard other people making similar comments that they found the rule book very tough to negotiate. I think if the game was redone with a cleaned up rule book, there are examples of play in the rules. There's the attack on Poland gives you some of the ground combat. There's the Battle of Midway example. But one of the things, just as a an example of one of the queries I had was that you're allowed to screen task forces. So if you've got two task forces, maybe one's got transports and troops and aircraft loaded on transport ships, and you've got a second task force which has got some carriers and battleships in it and some big hitters. You've got these two task forces. Okay, so they're in a megahex, and if they've both been detected, the enemy comes in and wants to attack them. You can say, oh, I'm going to screen my vulnerable ships with my tough task force, and they can't be hit unless the screening ships are destroyed. Right, so that's good. So if they're the passive player, they can be in a megahex and they can screen. What if they are the active player? What if the task force are moving? If you move your screening task force, you move it 1 megahex. Don't forget it can move 4. And what you then stop, finish the movement for that task force, and then move the transport task force, and that can now maybe one movement point because it's now joined its screening task force. So there's nothing in the rules that says that you can move them jointly. I don't see any reason why you shouldn't be able to do that. You've got two task forces that may be set out from the same megahex. Would they not be able to coordinate their actions such that they move together? And if they bump into an enemy task force en route, then one can screen the other. There's nothing in the rules that I can see that says that you can move task forces as a combined operation. So little house rule. Why can't you do that? I think you should be able to stick it in the rules. Just little things like that which you think, well, surely someone asked that question at some point. I can't see it written down anywhere. And there are some glaring terrain features which are lacking. The Pripyat marshes, it's got a big hole in it. Never seen any maps on the Eastern Front with holes in the Pripyat marshes. A lack of anything around Moscow. Apparently there were no trees in Sweden. Just some oddities. So I think a reworked map, which wouldn't take much to do. I also think that 9/16 counters would suffice. The big 5/8 ones are nice, but if anything they're a little bit too big. There's not much detail on the counters, and it means that on the Eastern Front, you'll see in a minute, it would be nice to have a bit more space in between the stacks, just to make that slightly more manageable. I mean, I use tweezers, it's not really a problem, but you think, do you know what, this would be a bit easier if there were 9/16 counters, and it wouldn't detract from any of the detail. So there we are. I think the Pacific Theatre would be interesting. I mean, I'm only, I suppose, halfway through the game in terms of time frame, but I mean less than half in terms of playing hours, because now that the Pacific Theatre is getting into full swing, there'll be a lot more to do there every turn, so it's quite a substantial commitment, and there's other stuff I want to have a go at in the meantime. So I've sealed my notes. If anybody wants a copy, they're more than welcome to ask for them. I like to think that other people get a chance to play it. I think it's a fun game. Play with 2, 3, 4, 5 people even, and I think it would be quite a fun experience. Anyway, I'll show you the map, and we'll see what we end up playing next time. Okay, so here we are on the Eastern Front. A little bit of glare, but they suffered a bit because they had committed heavily to submarines, so when they launched Barbarossa, they were probably 3 or 4 units down. So, I mean, Moscow is just here, and we're getting into spring 42 now, so there's going to be a bit more of a push. It's the Russian impulse will be next before the next German one, so some of these gaps will be filled. But the Germans are making a bit of headway, and in terms of the economics they're in a much better position in terms of resources, which you'll see in a minute. So I think 42 would be a fairly successful year for the Germans. That was the downside of the submarine commitment. The upside was that the Commonwealth were completely squeezed, and with a bit of HQ support for the supply constraints, the Italians have managed to push on and into Iraq. So they've captured Baghdad. The Commonwealth have managed to stabilise this. They've got now 3 infantry, I suppose, corps here with some aircraft, and there's some more on the way. So this is going to get tougher now for the Italians, but they've achieved quite a bit thanks to the lack of activity and resources by the Commonwealth particularly during 1940. The British are building up in Great Britain. The Germans cannot afford to ignore a potential second front, even in 42, because there's other stuff on the way. There's some US troops being shipped across to join these guys. So there could be a viable threat, probably more like 43, before they've got enough to be able to go in there in force. There's still a reasonable Luftwaffe presence. In fact, they've managed to rebuild the pocket battleship. They can get that up to Narvik. That could interdict the Lend-Lease routes into Murmansk. Okay, the strategic map. There are convoys still coming around the Cape of Good Hope. That's the long route round because the Med has been sealed off by the Italians, so that is another consequence of the Italian success in the Mediterranean. You've got the long route. I mean, some of their troops do start off in India or in South Africa, but anything British has just to come from the home country. The Americans are sending stuff from the west coast into the Pacific. Pearl Harbor happened. It was quite successful. Again, there's a rule in there that you sort of double the hits. Now I played that they must be taken on all the hits that are inflicted by the owner must be taken on the naval units, because there's a starting ground unit on the island, so you could argue, well, I'll take my hits on the infantry, which doesn't seem right either. So they basically lost. You roll to see if the carriers are present, and they were. The carriers were destroyed, and 2 of the battleships were damaged. So quite a nasty attack. It was a big carrier commitment by the Japanese. They've got back now to Japan. The nationalist China area has been conquered. The Japanese are now pushing on India. There's a couple of Indian corps there being supported with some American air which came out of the Philippines. The Japanese have taken the Philippines. They've also got British Borneo, and they're now threatening Malaya. So there's lots going on there. Port Moresby has just been reinforced by some American Marines. There are Japanese subs now which are trying to interdict this route, but we do have American aircraft, and I think that's a carrier group moving across from the west coast. So you try and create this air umbrella, which is quite typical of a lot of Pacific War games. And so the air that was being used on the mainland to attack the Chinese has moved out, and they did try and take Guam actually, but that was a failure. World War I amphibious disaster. So they have to have another go at that. But as I say, lots to get involved with. The economic position, the Soviets on 6, which is not great. The Germans are up at 14, so they've got more reserves, which will help them a lot in 42 and going forward. The Japanese are getting the rewards of their campaign success, starting to build up an industrial base. But the British are in a much better place now than they were before. So yeah, I hope that's been of interest, and I'd say anyone who wants to give it a go, don't be put off by the rules. Just start to play, and if you get stuck, I'm happy to assist, or you can just make up a few little bits to fill some of the gaps, which is most of it you can use a bit of common sense to resolve most issues. Ciao for now.